Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's now English version of our chess program on IBM TV, Pod TV. My name is Sasha Starr, and I would like to introduce our distinguished guests, Professor Kenneth Regan. Welcome to the program. It's
Yes,
great to see you
thank you
today.
very much for having me on again.
Yeah,
This
and of course, Vadim Tsipin, who is living in Canada, in Montreal, and who is well-known chess organizer, official, coach, and great, great human being. Vadim, thank you, and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Sasha. Hello, Ken. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Vadim. And what I wanted to talk about it is a question about sport and politics, or namely chess, because that's what we are all interested, first of all, and politics. And of course, as we know, it's very difficult, although some people believe that they have to be completely separated. Here is a sport, here is politics, there is nothing in common. There are some other people who believe that in a way sport is tied up with politics and cannot be viewed absolutely separately from it. And of course, I would like to remind about the World Chess Olympiad in Buenos Aires in 1939, when the Second World War just started while the Olympiad was still played, and some people would ignore it. Some other people, for example, the team of France, which Alohin was on the first board, refused to play German team. And I think Poland also refused to play German team. So anyway, the Olympiad was somehow completed, but we can start right there. And then I would remind, of course, Chess Olympiad in 1976 in Israel, where Soviet Union and all the Soviet bloc countries boycotted the Olympiad. So where are we with sport, or in our case, chess, is related to politics, or are they unrelated at all? What is your view on that? Ken, let me start with you,
yeah,
please.
so the main distinction that I draw is the fact that chess competitions, you are competing directly with someone from another country, and when there is or has recently been a state of war with that country, then that is a very difficult matter, and that's what also makes it um, the pointed question to ask about current boycotts, such as between Middle Eastern countries and Israel, is whether is that I believe that this is tantamount to saying that there is or has recently been a state of war between the countries, and there are some who will say that. So that to me is the clear line that I believe needs to be followed. And if you follow that line, then it is possible to have more mixing and more leniency and more engagement at other levels. There will at some point need to be a healing process from this, and but I don't know whether I will put it 10, 15 years out. It's one thing I forgot to look up is how soon it took for Germany to be allowed to take part in Olympic Games again. And I believe that was fairly soon.
Vadim, before I'll get back to you, I would like to mention something about Germany. That today's Germany is essentially a completely different nation than one which was in the 40s and even 50s and even 60s. It
Yeah.
took two generations to create a new German citizen, new German nation, right?
Right.
But it's only after 12 years of Hitler's power, the Russia, which was ruled by Tsars and before that by Mongols, and then communists, which are not much better than Mongols, and now Putin, which is just as evil as all of them put together. Are we talking about 10, 15 years from now? About 150 years from now.
Mhm.
But future will tell us. Vadim, what's your opinion on that subject?
My point of view is that nothing exists in a vacuum. No human activity, be it arts, sports, scientific exchange, can be seen separate from what's going on in the wider world. And we are living in an unprecedented times. Some people call it a start of the Third World War, and we all pray that this would be contained. It will not happen. We shall look at what moral authorities and what legal authorities in this world that unite all of us as human beings talk about preventing loss of human life and stopping the aggression. And at this point, in the barbaric war that the Russian Federation unleashed on its neighbor Ukraine, we have a very clear guidance from, for example, the United Nations General Assembly. It convened its 11th emergency session, just 11th time for the whole time of the existence of the United Nations. 141 countries deplored in strongest terms Russia's aggression. Only 4 countries voted against this resolution. They were all client states of Russia, which are Syria, North Korea, Eritrea, and Belarus. So this is something that unites us all as human beings and calls us to use all means at our disposal to stop killings of innocent beings. Furthermore, the International Court of Justice, which is in The Hague, which is a supreme judicial authority in the international legal system, ordered Russia to immediately suspend its military operations that it commands in the territory of Ukraine. The International Olympic Committee recommended that all international sports federations and sports events organizers not invite or allow the participation of Russian or Belarusian athletes and officials in international competition.
Yes.
This is the time for the whole world to come together and to put some pressure, because the blood of pregnant Ukrainian women and innocent children being bombed in Mariupol, Irpin, Akhtirka, and other cities calls upon us not to stay dispassionately neutral, as some would like to say, but to take immediate measures to prevent the killings and to stop the aggressor. And as a Canadian, I am very proud to remind the historical precedent in 1970s and in 1980s, where Canada was leading the international effort to use sports as a tool to dismantle the apartheid regime in South Africa. Due to the Canadian involvement and advocacy, no sport teams from South Africa were allowed to participate in international competitions, most importantly in the marquee sport, which was rugby, and in the Olympic Games. It was efficient. According to Nelson Mandela himself, this gave a huge boost, and it brought into the spotlight the human rights violations in South Africa. And then when F.W. de Klerk and Mandela were dismantling this regime, they recognized that the sports world involvement helped facilitate this. So I feel that by putting pressure in chess, we not only repudiate in strongest term the Kremlin regime, but we also support not just the nation of Ukraine, which is heroically fighting for the whole world, but also the brave people in Russia itself, which do disagree with their country's policies. And we know that more than 40 distinguished chess officials, coaches, and players from Russia signed an open letter asking to stop the war. And many of them took a dramatic step of switching their federations. So by boycotting people who did not take the position, I think we are helping the people who did already.
Okay, so we've got a very interesting view of both of you on chess and politics, and we touched also subject about chess and war.
Right. I think we both gave a very simple answer to your first question. We both see sports as instrumental to the
Absolutely.
political scene rather than completely apart from it.
However, now I will go a little bit farther than that.
Mhm.
What if it's not a war? What if it's an extermination and genocide of Ukrainian nation, which is going right in front of us in the last several weeks? It's a terror. So Russia is becoming a terrorist state that is using a terror of innocent civilians and children to achieve their absolutely idiotic goals of creating some kind of a some Soviet Union too. Uh, because if Putin said a while ago that the dissolution of Soviet Union is the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, so the resurrection of Soviet Union of some kind is definitely his the goal of his life, and I'm pretty sure that his life is not going to be that long after what he's done, and how you treat. Oh, by the way, I've just learned on the Russian version of our program that 11 years old gymnast girl was killed in Mariupol. So, how you then treat the terrorist state that is doing genocide of its neighbor and supposedly friendly, almost same nation as Putin was saying? Then what? Ken, could you address it,
Well,
please?
I would say Vadim's answer about South Africa certainly implies what you're saying, because there was a case where there was no war and there was a social policy completely within the boundaries of an existing country, and yet sports were instrumental to reverse that. So I think it just goes all the stronger for what you're saying.
Absolutely. And you, Vadim, what are your thoughts on that?
I support both your and Ken's opinions, and I think we can talk about an asymmetric methods because Russia is a bankrupt state morally and financially. The only advantage they have over us in the free world is a complete uh, disregard for the value of human life. We in the West, we value every human life, and we are trying to save people, both civilians and brave people in our armed forces. Russia doesn't care. Russia doesn't care about people whom they are destroying, and it also doesn't care about its own soldiers, sending them unprepared and uh, unfed and untrained into this criminal adventure. So instead of fighting Russia on their own term and sacrificing lives of many brave young people from the Western world, we are supporting Ukraine by other means, by diplomatic, military, financial means, but also by unleashing what equates to a whole uh, extent economic war against Russia, isolating it, making it a pariah state, exposing it for an outcast it became. As Senator John McCain, late Senator McCain, famously said, Russia is just a gas station that considers itself to be a superpower, right? And when the West takes apart all this uh, financial flow of financial means and export of natural resources, it is exposed for an impotent and evil power that it became. So sports, as we are returning to what Ken has said, is just another tool and a very efficient tool because humans live connect to humans. People like people's stories. When we hear about this 11-year-old girl and see her picture with her medals, with her coach, as it was everywhere on the news agency tapes yesterday, or when we see first chess players being killed while bravely defending their country in a territorial defense, We relate to that. And it is not a coincidence that hundreds of thousands of people march every weekend in all world capitals and in all major cities. 37 millions of Canadians are supporting Ukraine by their deeds, by their contribution, and by pressure they put on our elected representatives.
Excellent. I would say is that as you know, there's a Magnus Carlsen group tournament is right now, online tournament, believe it or not. And what he said is that well, besides that the part of the prize fund is going to help Ukraine, he also said that in under the circumstances, and it was a while ago, 2-3 weeks ago, the participation of Russian grandmaster is not desirable.
Yeah.
That said, the champion of the world, who is the highest authority in the chess world. Ken,
And this was after he gave a non-committal statement about this policy too. So that was very interesting to me.
Mhm.
The initial statement was, "I'll wait," and then he came out and said that. Yeah, that's very, and of course it matters to me because right now I am simultaneously doing the statistical checking for both the Carlsen tournament and the FIDE Grand Prix right now. I have Russians in only one of them, so.
And what are your findings so far?
Well, actually, I mean, nothing, no cheating in the in-person tournament, nothing in the other one, the prelims. So, but the more important datum that I had also when I was doing in Belgrade is that the Russian players were playing normally. They were not depressed, maybe a little bit, but not within outside bounds of statistical significance in the first two rounds when they did lose a couple of games. By the end of the tournament, collectively, the five of them were playing completely the same level as their ratings would suggest. So that was interesting.
So
Just that people can just sit down and play chess and block things out.
So let's see. In 1939, for a Russian invasion of Finland, Russia, or Soviet Union at the time, was kicked out of the League of Nations. What would it take now to kick Russia out of the United Nations? By the way, there's a technical aspect of it. That remember, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were three members in the United Nations: Soviet Union itself, Ukraine, and Belarusia. So Belarus and Ukraine stopped their association with the Soviet Union. Ukraine was the first one because there was a referendum on, I believe, 1st of December of 1991. And on the 8th, just 1 week later, and of course, Kravchuk was elected president of Ukraine. And on the 8th, they were got all together in Belarusia, namely in Belovezhskaya Pushcha, the Kravchuk, Yeltsin, and Shushkevich, and the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Now, so Ukraine remained the part of the United Nations. Belarus remained as a part of the United Nations, although no longer associated with the Soviet Union, but there was no longer such entity. Now, where comes Russia? What makes Russia the member of United Nations? De facto they are, we all know that, but they never went through due process to become a member of United Nations. When Yugoslavia fell apart, each country, Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia and all others, they had to go through due process to become a member of United Nations. They did, and they were accepted. At what point Russia did that, go through that route? It never did. And it's now too little too late, just out. They are not deserving. The country terrorist the country exterminating people, their neighbor, the country that provides genocide of innocent civilians and children cannot be a member of United Nations. It's as simple as that. And by the way, I would kick them out of FIDE just as well.
But,
What does it make in FIDE?
but it's always been a principle that the United Nations is for everyone to talk, no matter how evil or ostracized. That's the whole purpose of the organization. So, for instance, Germany was never kicked out of the United Nations. It was believed that it was very important to have them present and and kept for discussions. It's simply the Churchill's maxim that jaw is better than war, even with your greatest adversaries. So I would not go that far.
So how far, in your opinion, Russia has to go for you to be convinced to kick them out of all organizations, associations, federations, and so on and on and on?
I have a very funny counterpoint to this, and it now seems completely trivial. But especially with the Olympics, for the past 5+ years, there have been the sanctioning over the drug scandal, state-sponsored doping scandal, which also goes to the heart of being anti-sport. And so there was already a question about whether to bar Russia's participation from Olympics based solely on that.
But Ken, I'm curious how you can compare some people are taking some substances, some meldoni, or whatever it might be, to genocide.
Well, the point is actually, I'm saying a fortiori. I'm saying that, given the fact that one can already consider the question of banning Russia for something so minor gives much more force to what you were saying about banning Russia for a period of time for this kind of aggression. And and more clearly, designs upon a neighbor. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to do comparative history here, but it's new times, new measures. So
exactly, totally agree. Vadim, what do you think?
Yes, I would like to go back in history and start where you stopped, Sasha, saying that the League of Nations showed itself inefficient in preventing the Second World War. So the Allied countries started to look for a mechanism to create a new system that would ensure peace and coexistence. And the system that was codified in 1945 in San Francisco had the United Nations with the Security Council, where 5 permanent members were 5 allies that bore the brunt of the biggest effort in defeating Nazi Germany and the Imperial Japan. They were the United Kingdom, the United States, the Soviet Union, England, France and China, right? Comintern China, by the way. So the system was created in such a way that the veto power that was given to the Security Council members would make it absolutely impossible to make any decisions that would negate any of their actions in the international world, because only the Security Council had the authority to deploy peacekeeping forces, to declare military actions, anything else. And initially, from 1945 to mid-50s, only the countries that were on the Allied side were allowed to be members of the United Nations. It's a testament to how our thinking has evolved in the Western world. Is that indeed Italy, Germany, Bulgaria, and Japan were eventually admitted to the United Nations. And indeed, the jaw principle, I liked very much your metaphor, was established. But the primacy of the permanent P5, what they call P5, the permanent members of the Security Council, has stayed. And this is a strength of the system, but this is also a weakness of the system. And what happened with the Russian war on Ukraine, which started not a month ago. It started in 2014 with an illegal annexation of Crimea, was that for the first time since 1945, the borders in Europe were redrawn by military force in clear violation of the United Nations Charter and the final act of the Helsinki Conference of 1975. So the argument that you, Sasha, put ahead so eloquently was also advanced by a gentleman whom I admire watching, which is his name is Serhiy Kislitsa. He is the Ukraine's ambassador to the United Nations, and I watched him doing wonderful presentations to the world and his colleague of diplomats, saying that the informal agreement, whereas Russia would inherit the Soviet Union's place in the Security Council, was never formally confirmed by any UN body. And when this quote unquote successor country behaves in a way that is contrary to both the spirit and the letter of the UN Charter, it raises a serious question where it should occupy this place.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that is a serious question. Yes.
Again, if membership in United Nations, if it would be some kind of a property with a title, and when the person is dying, he can put a will and say in its will, I'm dying Soviet Union, I put in my will that it will go to Russia. Okay, that's possible. And the membership in organization, it's not the property that belongs to some kind of a country, even if it's a great Russia. No, it's not enough. It has to go through procedure, and that never been done. Well, that's life. That's where we are right now. On the funny side, I would like to add that city of Odessa in the Soviet times, when I still lived there, it was a capital of humor in the Soviet Union. And even now, in a horrible wartime, there is a lot of humor in what Odessa is and its armed forces are doing. For example, Vadim, I sent you a very interesting info about the Russian descent ship, which was absolutely killed by a rocket fire. And when the commander of this operation, he was interviewed, and he said that, well, there was a rocket and there was no ship. So the correspondent who was doing interviews asked, were they all Russians drowned? He said, not really, they were all burned. However, there will be enough left over for fishes to enjoy. So this is something interesting. Another one is interesting thing what I wanted to mention. Remember, there were talk about 16,000 Syrian fighters that would support Russia and would go to fight for Russia. At first, Syrians were not very enthusiastic about, but then they changed their mind and they said that yes, they want to go as soon as possible. What's happened? Apparently, besides $300 cash, each one of them would get Kalashnikov. You know how much Kalashnikov cost in the black market? It's a lot of money. So they said, okay, $300 plus Kalashnikov, and I will get some couple of $1,000 at least on it. And so he can come to European country, which Ukraine is. He can have a lot of cash, and he can find a beautiful Ukrainian girl and marry her. He'll be seated. He doesn't have to go back and just settle there. Now, but it didn't happen. There was a problem. They are fighting in sandals. And in Ukraine, during the winter time, it's not optimal shoe wear. So they ask Russians to prepare 32,000 pairs of boots for the Syrians. A couple of days later, the Russians reply, they don't have so many boots. They have only 800 pairs. So all that plan was derailed. because there is not enough wood. I'm surprised actually that they didn't sell even this 800 pairs on the black market. They could still make some money. Why they keep them? And the final thing what I heard from war stories is about Ukrainian encouraged Russians that if they bring their tank to to Ukrainians, sorry, they will be paid $10,000, and they will be guaranteed safety and so on. So it's a good alternative. In fact, instead of being killed in a tank,
Yeah.
you are alive and you have $10,000. Okay, so at least one tank already made this move, and they're accepting many more tanks to do exactly that. And I don't know. Maybe they should have asked for $15,000, but anyway, $10,000 is not bad.
And I hope they treat the Belarusian partisans the same way. I'm using the World War II word for people who disrupted railway lines behind the scenes. That's an amazing story. And I'm curious, what are the ethnic differences between Belarusians and Russians? That's something that's opaque to me. White Russians, I know from history 100 years ago, but
I would say that the difference is only that a Belarusian is much more ethnically Slavs than Russians. Also, Belarusia was part of the Union of Lithuanian and Polish Union, same as Ukraine, by the way. So Belarusia is way much more Ukraine, the same as Ukraine, is European nation than Russia itself. Russia itself, it's a lot of Asian people, Finnish stock, all this Mongols and Tatars and so on. So although Russians basically they look like Western people, but they're obviously not. They went through complete different history, different religion, 250 years of domination of Tatar and Mongols. So essentially the nation is basically their slaves. They are descendants of slaves, and they were always slaves during the Tsars and Bolsheviks and so on. It's a slavery mentality, unlike Ukraine and Belarus. That's my answer. Would you agree, Vadim?
I would say that education and enlightenment are the way to help every nation in the world, right? We see military censorship in Russia. We see that all independent media voices are now extinguished. And it is incumbent on all of us in the West to tell people of Russia about the universal repudiation that the action of their dictator, criminal dictator, is finding in the West. The United States Department of State has already qualified the Russian actions in Ukraine as the war crimes. And the International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan is currently in Ukraine finding evidence and compiling evidence for the new Nuremberg process. So I believe that through enlightenment and through education, through finding good in the hearts and minds of ordinary people, we can help Ukraine defend its independence and stop this terrible war.
Okay, before we finish our program, final question. What about our friend Karyakin? Ken, what do you think?
I would not play him over the board if I were Ukrainian, and therefore I do not think people can play him for the near future in any tournament where there could possibly be Ukrainian participation. I realize there are no Ukrainians in the candidates, but the theory is still there. So
What do
I
you think?
support the ban.
Do you think if somebody would punch him in the face, do you think that someone would be tried and convicted? Because of what you will say, he hit somebody, a person of no moral standing, the person who is a traitor and just just as guilty as almost as Putin himself. So I just did good thing for all humanity. But
Well, I wouldn't go there now.
you know,
But the other thing for counterpoint, if you want some counterweight, I think
Yeah.
the Russian gymnast who put a Z on his uniform,
Mhm.
and whether he was standing next to a Ukrainian in the same competition or not, I forget the detail. I think that was actually much worse. I think that was actually worse than what I've seen Karyakin doing. It's a public display of support and contempt for someone. I think it was
But
in the
but
same
what
game.
what Haryakin is saying is also on a public display through different means. Obviously, you compare visual image with words, and I'm not so sure what is more significant.
Yeah.
It's a judgment call. Vadim, you?
Yes, there are two sides of it. Myself, I'm an absolutist, a libertarian. I believe that freedom of speech is sacrosanct, but there is a fine line between free speech and instigation. When someone instigates the actions that clearly hurt other people or are hateful to other people, there are hate speech laws in all democratic countries, including Canada. So if Mr. Karakin's actions crossed this line, then he was duly punished for this.
Mhm. Okay, gentlemen, I thank you so much for enlightened conversation today, and I'm looking forward to see you next Thursday. All the way, bye bye, and have a great week. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I hope we
Stay
have
safe.
better times ahead. Okay.
I hope so.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.